Okay. All right. Well, everybody, thanks for joining us. Welcome to the next installment of the Vibrant America Educational Webinar Series. I'm your host, Sarah Ashman, clinical dietitian and marketing liaison at Vibrant. I am super excited today to present Dr. Tom O'Brien to discuss pathogenic intestinal permeability. Dr. O'Brien is an internationally recognized author, speaker, and educator with decades of experience in the functional and integrative medicine world. He has really revolutionized the way providers think about intestinal permeability, autoimmunity, and chronic disease. He holds teaching faculty positions with the Institute for Functional Medicine and the National University of Health Sciences. He's also the founder of thedoctor.com and the visionary behind the Gluten Summit. For more information about Dr. O'Brien, you can visit those websites, www.thedoctor.com or www.theglutensummit.com. Dr. O'Brien, thanks so much for joining us today. We are so appreciative of your time and just incredibly excited to hear what you have to say.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. Thanks so much. And hello, everyone. I'm going to change the screen here and see if we can get the my slides up here for you. And I think we can. Let's see if this does it. Let's see.
It might take just a second for it to show up once you hit screen share. Yep.
Okay.
There you go.
This is how I want you all to feel about intestinal permeability. That you're able to address it smoothly, with grace, and without any falling down. So that's the goal here. I've got quite a few slides to share with you. I'm going to make some assumptions that everyone here is at least familiar with the concept of intestinal permeability. So I'll go through some basics of it for entry level, but then move on to more comprehensive overview. So let's just get started with, why are we talking about this topic? Why are we talking about intestinal permeability? And if there's one thing, this is on display in the Museum of Science in Florence. It's Galileo's finger. And Galileo bequeathed that his finger could be on display, that all of his inventions could be on display for all of posterity, as long as they also displayed his finger. And so you'll see his finger is there in full view in one of the galleries of the Museum of Science in Florence. Now, I put that there because it reminds me of the hundreds of seminars, literally, that I've attended over the years, like you, and if it's a weekend seminar with a couple of speakers, and if they're good, my pen is furiously writing, check this study, check this patient for this, order this product, check out this text, and just page after page of notes. And you go back on Monday morning and there's no time to implement any of it. And this has happened to me so many times in my career, and I know all of you can relate to that. And I came up with this idea, this premise: if there's just one thing out of a weekend seminar that stays with me for the rest of my career, if there's just one thing, then that weekend, the thousands of dollars, travel, the airfares, the hotels, the taxis, the meals, being away from the family, closing the practice, all of that was worth it if there's just one thing that I remember and implement. I wish there were 10, but if there's one, I needed to be satisfied with that. And so what's the one thing out of this next hour, or a little more than an hour, that we have together? The one thing is that increased intestinal permeability is, I underline here, is an early biological change that precedes the onset of autoimmune diseases. Bottom line, that's it. And so the more we know about this opens the gateway. We refer to it, intestinal permeability is the gateway in the development of autoimmune diseases. So close the gate. And that's what this is about, is recognizing, identifying this problem, and then how do you close the gate? So this paper came out in 2005 by Alessio Fasano, who now chairs pediatric gastroenterology at Mass General at Harvard. And the classical paradigm of autoimmune pathogenesis involving a specific genetic makeup, meaning the weak link in your chain, and exposure to environmental triggers has been challenged by the addition of a third element, the loss of intestinal barrier function. I can't tell you how many of our world famous gastroenterologists in 2005 were still saying there's no such thing as intestinal permeability. Anybody that talks about it is a nutcase. And it was just a common comment that patients would get when they go to a functional medicine practitioner, an integrative medicine practitioner, holistic medicine practitioner, and then they go to a gastroenterologist for some reason, and they were told that that other practitioner didn't know what they were talking about. So 12 years ago, this was groundbreaking information, not that long ago. So you guys are on the cutting edge, and hopefully today you're going to get a big comprehensive overview so there's no questions anymore about how to identify this thing. Increased permeability could be due to environmental triggers, environmental factors such as infections, toxic molecules, allergenic foods that possibly initiate the autoimmune disease. Together with the gut-associated lymphoid tissue, the neuroendocrine network, the intestinal epithelial barrier with its intercellular tight junctions controls, now I do the underlying here, controls the equilibrium between tolerance and immunity, and suggests that, and here's the bullet, here's the real bullet, the autoimmune process can be arrested if the interplay between genes and environmental triggers is prevented by reestablishing intestinal barrier function. That's the big takeaway. And we think Dr. Fasano will get the Nobel Prize one day for this because this affects millions of people. You'll see it in your practice every day, not every week, every day. When you look thoroughly, and we'll talk about how do you look thoroughly, when you look thoroughly to identify this, you're going to see it all the time with conditions that you normally wouldn't suspect would be contributed to by pathogenic intestinal permeability. Now let me address that right away. Why do I say pathogenic? Because intestinal permeability is not bad for you. Excessive intestinal permeability is bad for you. It triggers a pathogenic process. But intestinal permeability is how we absorb our nutrients, how we determine friend from foe. The mechanism is a normal part of physiology. It's the excessive intestinal permeability that's a problem, and we'll talk all about that. So these autoimmune diseases, where does it come from? What are some of the primary triggers identified in the literature? Dietary components, toxic chemicals, and infections within the stew of your genes. Whatever your genetic vulnerabilities are, those are the mechanisms, you put them together, and here come the autoimmune spectrum, and eventually the autoimmune disease. So we've got the environmental triggers, which cause a breakdown in oral tolerance, which cause a change in the gut microbiota, which cause enhanced gut permeability to large macromolecules, which initiate and trigger an immune response trying to protect you, which then will trigger autoimmunity. Now here comes a shameless plug. This whole mechanism is outlined in detail in this book that we published just over a year ago. And it's a National Book Award winner. It really is a great book, and I'm so proud of it. So when you want to get this big picture on the development of all of this mechanism, not just the intestinal permeability component, which today is about, but when you want the big picture of this mechanism, check out this book. It's on Amazon. Check it out. And if you don't like it, if you think it's a waste of your money, send me a note. I'll send you back your money. I don't care. I think I get like $1.20 from each book. It's really about everyone understanding these principles by which we're going to change the world. So that's my shameless plug for this session. Please consider reading this, because when you do, you'll understand all of this. It'll become crystal clear. There's over 300 studies in the book that are referenced so that you get the big picture on this. But today, what we're talking about is this component right here. this is what we're going to talk about. And I hope, of course, you can't become experts in an hour, but I'm sure many of you have already been dealing with this. And now you're going to have a bigger picture, a much clearer view of it. Okay, here we go. What is this thing, autoimmunity? Well, you know, it affects absolutely any tissue. I don't know of any tissue except your nails. I don't know that there's an autoimmune disease of the nails. I know that there can be manifestations in the nails that are like a biomarker of problems somewhere else. But aside from that, every other tissue, as far as I know, is vulnerable to an autoimmune mechanism, meaning your immune system attacking the tissue. Just a couple of things about autoimmune diseases. Look how many years to diagnosis is the average. And look at what poor progress we've made in the last 15 to 20 years. And how many patients or how many doctors has a patient had to see? And how many were told they're just whining, you know, that they're just complainers? I mean, it's just horrible, the entire dynamic of identifying an autoimmune mechanism in someone's body. Excuse me. Why so long and difficult to get a correct diagnosis? Physician education was identified as a contributing factor. And the American Autoimmune and Related Disease Association did a survey of general practitioners. Look at what they found. How much training in autoimmune diseases did you receive in your medical education? Look how many of them feel they had 5 or more lectures, 3 to 5 lectures, 2 lectures, 1 lecture. And notice these are lectures. These are not courses. These are lectures. And how many received enough training to diagnose and treat autoimmune disease? How many would strongly agree? 4.6% strongly agree that they've got enough training to identify this. So we're not alone out there thinking, oh my gosh, how in the heck do you identify autoimmune diseases? Well, that's one of the primary directives of Vibrant Labs. And gosh, I forgot. I'm supposed to thank Vibrant Labs for hosting me today. So thank you, Vibrant Labs. And I'm going to talk about some of their tests because they're just fabulous tests. But it's so difficult for most practitioners to identify the autoimmune spectrum. And I know that that's a primary concern of our hosts today. So I'm proud to be speaking on this topic of intestinal permeability. What's your level of comfort in diagnosing autoimmune diseases? Think of where you would put yourself on this spectrum. And if you're listening to this event, you're certainly in the minority because you already know how important this is. And I'm sure many of you feel comfortable because you put some time into this already. And I want to make sure that everyone feels very comfortable with identifying intestinal permeability after today. So this is kind of what we're looking at in the world of autoimmunity and identifying the mechanisms that set it up. So here we go. Premise number 2, how prevalent is the development of autoimmune diseases? I'm going to introduce a new concept to you here, or for some of you, it's a new concept. We've all heard that autoimmune diseases are the 3rd leading cause of morbidity and mortality in the industrialized world, surpassed only by heart disease and cancer. And we all know that cardiovascular disease is the #1 mechanism in getting sick and dying in the world. We all know that. Well, I'm going to introduce a little food for thought here and encourage you, if you want to read more about this. But immune-driven inflammation is key to the development of cardiovascular disease. We've all heard that before. Look at the title of this one. Autoantibodies to apolipoprotein A1 as a biomarker of cardiovascular autoimmunity. Or this one, accelerated atherosclerosis and autoimmune rheumatic diseases. And what did they say? Atherosclerosis is increasingly considered an immune system mediated process. Or this one, autoimmunity plays a major role in the development of dyslipidemia and atherosclerotic plaque. The mechanisms underlying these changes include the interplay of inflammation and autoantibody formation. Or this one, atherogenesis has been proposed to be considered an autoimmune disease. And I've got 5 pages of citations, just citations, not the abstracts, just the citations of the autoimmunity of cardiovascular disease. When you start looking into this, your jaw drops and you realize that what we think is the #1 cause of getting sick and dying is actually a mechanism of the immune system. And when you learn about autoimmune diseases, you find out that almost all the time, the autoimmune mechanism is trying to protect you. So the question is, what's it trying to protect you from? Is it really an immune system that's gone haywire, or is it an immune system that's trying to protect you? And because of things like molecular mimicry and cross-reactivity, our own tissue starts becoming attacked. And that's what the book, The Autoimmune Fix, is about. And I'm sure we'll be having more webinars in the future on those topics. But for now, just a little food for thought about atherogenesis being an autoimmune disease. And we've all seen artists like this. And you see here antibodies to oxidative LDL, antibodies to lipoprotein lipase, antibodies to phospholipids, all part of the cardiovascular syndrome. Thus, if atherogenesis has an initiating autoimmune component, arguably, what becomes the #1 mechanism in the progression of morbidity and mortality in the industrialized world? And as my godmother would say, you think? Isn't it something that we should at least be considering, that it's a primary mechanism? Why am I harping on that? Because if it's a primary mechanism, how often is it in your practice? And if it's a primary mechanism, it's in your practice every day. The autoimmune mechanism is in your practice every day, whether it's progressed to an autoimmune disease or not. And we'll elaborate that a lot in the future when we're looking more at the autoimmunity of self and different tissues. But the gateway in the development of autoimmune diseases is intestinal permeability. So here we are today to talk about the gateway in what arguably is the #1 mechanism in getting sick and dying in the world. Intestinal permeability, the #1 mechanism. So an activated immune system causing chaos in the body. Kind of hard to stand up straight when you've got this kind of chaos going on in your body. Increased intestinal permeability is the early biological change that precedes the onset of autoimmune diseases. So what is this pathogenic intestinal permeability? This is from Pisano's article again back in 2005. An extremely important function of the GI tract is its ability to regulate the trafficking of macromolecules between the environment and the host through a barrier mechanism, a critically important function of the GI tract. Mrs. Patient, your intestines are a tube. The tube is 20, 25 feet long, winds around inside your abdomen, starts at the mouth, goes to the other end. Imagine that it's a donut, and you could just stretch the donut out, one big long donut. And when you swallow food, look down that hole, that donut, look down the hole in the middle of the donut. That's your digestive tract. It's just one big long tube. You swallow food, it's not in the body yet, it's still in the tube. To get into the body, it's got to go through the walls of the donut. Well, the inside lining of the GI tract, Mrs. Patient, is lined with cheesecloth. It only lets certain size molecules get through. That's one of the reasons why your intestine is 20 feet long, is because it takes a long time to break down some of these proteins. It takes a whole lot longer to break down prime rib than it does a banana. So those things that take longer to break down, you just have to have more time to do it. So you can't let this big clump of prime rib get through the proximal part of the small intestine, right? It's got to be broken down smaller and smaller and smaller. So this cheesecloth does not let macromolecules get through. This is a little, this came out of the journal Shock, and it shocked me when I read it, and it just reinforced how important it is. The degree of systemic inflammation, not in one disease, in any disease, the correlation between the degree of systemic inflammation is the increase in intestinal permeability. That's how important this topic is. So here's a picture. that I took from the interpretive guide at Genova Diagnostics for their intestinal permeability test. I took this picture and I blew it up and I put it in an 8x11 clear piece of plastic, and it was in the treatment rooms. Mrs. Patient, your intestines are a tube, you know, it's lined with cheesecloth. The inside of the tube has got shag carpeting. This is a picture of the shags, and this is human microvilli, by the way. And it looks like someone took a pin and punched holes in the tips of the shags, of the shag carpeting. Just pow, 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 pow. And what happens now is that big clumps of food, all those little orange things you see, those are clumps of food. Those clumps of food, before they've been broken down small enough to fit through the cheesecloth, they can get through these holes. And they're called macromolecules, big molecules. They get through into the bloodstream, and your immune system says, what the heck is that? So let's take a look at how they get through. Normally, the way they get through, from this drawing from the Annals of the New York Academy of Science, you see in box B, that's actually a tight junction. See the TJ? That's a tight junction. And so food it comes down, the tight junction is like the Panama Canal. And if you see the blow up down in the lower left corner of the tight junction, you see the loops that are there. The loops are brought together they're called kissing joints. Well, those are the gates of the Panama Canal. And the kissing joint opens, the gate opens, the food molecule goes down into that first section, the gate closes. Now your immune system checks out, what the heck is in there? Then the next gate opens below it, the food goes down a little further and the gate closes. And another part of your immune system says, what the heck is this? Let's just make sure this is okay. That's how we absorb most of our nutrients. Isn't it cool to see the pictures? This is so cool to see, because, and you think Panama Canal, it starts to make sense. Now in the bottom right side, you're seeing the paracellular space. That's the tight junctions in between the two cells. I refer to these proteins called the occludin proteins as shoelaces. And when your shoes are tied tight, nothing gets through. Think of a high school kid wearing floppy tennis shoes. His shoelaces are untied and he can't run very well. His shoes flop on his feet. That's intestinal permeability, when the gates are open and the gateway into the development of autoimmune disease, right? The gates are open, so these larger molecules get right through the paracellular space. Here's a blow-up picture of the tight junction, what it looks like. And we're going to talk about this area also, called actomyosin. Now, do you notice how the microvilli, you notice how the microvilli have roots that are going down into the actomyosin? Look at the top arrow, and you see the roots going down there in between the arrow. That's going to be important when we talk about how do you test for intestinal permeability. So remember that picture. And here's another artist drawing. There's actually two ways intestinal permeability occurs, two main ways. The most common way that's talked about is the paracellular, in between the cells. That's the one in the middle. But also there's another way called the transcellular, right through the cells. And this drawing is there to represent both of them. So the paracellular, you see the shoelaces are untied, the zonulin family of proteins are all broken up. And in the transcellular, you see that LPS and macromolecules can go right through also. We'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes. So let's just move past that slide. Another paper from Dr. Fasano just a few years ago. Among the several potential intestinal stimuli that can trigger zonulin release, notice he doesn't say sometimes. It's all the time. Small intestinal exposure to bacteria and gluten are the two triggers that have been identified so far. That's how important it is to understand this thing about wheat and wheat sensitivity. Now, we aren't talking about that today very much. There'll be some peripheral reference, but that's how important it is. It is the food, the only food that's been demonstrated every time you're exposed to wheat, you trigger intestinal permeability. I'll show you the studies as we move along on that one. But it's the only food that's been shown that way. There are others that are common triggers, but not constant triggers. Here's a study from Holland and the team at Harvard. that came out about 1.5 years ago. There's an emerging recognition that individuals who react to gluten-containing food in a manner symptomatically just like celiac, meaning it can affect any tissue in your body, yet without the typical celiac blood work or the associated histopathology. You do an endoscopy and a biopsy and they're normal. They don't have villus atrophy. Now, as you all may know, in celiacs, 1 out of 8 has GI symptoms. 7 out of 8 do not. They've got symptoms somewhere else, not in the GI tract, the brain, the heart, the liver, the kidneys. And that's what Holland's referring to here, that these individuals can react to gluten in a manner symptomatically indistinguishable from celiac, meaning it can affect any part of your body. So what they did here was they took 4 groups. They took recently diagnosed celiac, so they had villus atrophy, celiacs in remission, meaning on a gluten-free diet for a minimum of a year to 2 years, and repeat endoscopy had showed that their villi had healed. People that had a problem with wheat, but did not have celiac, categorized as non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and controls that had no problem with wheat. So they looked at all 4 groups. What did they find when they looked at all 4 groups? Intestinal exposure to gliadin leads to zonulin upregulation, that's the shoelaces, and disassembly of intercellular tight junctions, and increased intestinal permeability. That was their basic background premise. And what did they show in these 4 groups? Increased intestinal permeability after gliadin exposure occurs in all individuals. And in a comment paper that I forgot to put in here, Dr. Fasano said, this occurs in all humans. So anyone out there tonight that's listening to this, if you are a human, you get intestinal permeability every time you're exposed to wheat, every time, whether you get symptoms or not. Now, it's because the fastest growing cells in the body are the inside lining of the gut. So you tear the lining of the gut and it heals. You have toast for breakfast, you tear the lining of the gut, it heals. A sandwich for lunch, tear the lining of the gut, it heals. Pasta for dinner, tear the lining of the gut, it heals. A cookie, tear the lining of the gut, and it heals until one day you don't heal anymore. Now you have pathogenic intestinal permeability. But everyone has this mechanism occurring. If you're a human, this mechanism occurs every time you're exposed to wheat. Read this paper. When you read this paper, it's going to shift how you think about this. Or one of the other papers, I've got a couple of references in here on that same theme that you'll see. Here's one of them. This was 10 years ago I read this, and I've been talking about it on stage ever since, right? Gliadin activates the zonulin signaling, resulting in immediate reduction of intestinal barrier function and passage of gliadin into the subepithelium. Immediately, within 5 minutes, I'm going to show you a video in a little bit. Within 5 minutes, this occurs. It's like, what? What? Whether you feel it or not, every time they're exposed. Besides bacterial exposure, we've shown that gliadin, the main staple protein in wheat, affects the intestinal barrier function by releasing zonulin. So this paper in Clinical Gastroenterology and Hepatology in 2012, can they say it any differently? Now, here's a new concept. For many of us, this will be a new concept. The cytokine network involved in celiac, of course, is characterized by producing interferon gamma in the intestinal mucosa. Okay, we know about cytokines that are produced in the inflammatory cascade that begins. Interferon gamma increases significantly in non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and increased IELs occurs. It's much higher than in celiac disease. And look at the title of this paper. Non-celiac gluten sensitivity triggers gut dysbiosis, neuroinflammation, gut-brain axis dysfunction, and vulnerability for dementia. From wheat sensitivity. I'm going to give you this paper so you can read it. You have to read these papers. Some of these are just going to drop your jaw when you read them. Now, here's a paper that just came out that just dropped my jaw when I read it. Low-dose interferon gamma. Low dose, it doesn't take a lot, induce brush border fanning, allowing the passage of non-pathogenic bacteria through enlarged intermicrovillous spaces. So this is not paracellular permeability, and facilitated bacteria going into the subepithelial compartment via lipid rafts. It's called lipid raft transcytosis. It means hopping on the back of a fat molecule and going right through the cell. Transcellular, not paracellular. So this is really interesting. Just a little bit of interferon gamma encourages lipid raft transcytosis. Just a little bit. It doesn't take much. And when you eat wheat, you increase interferon gamma, which means you're not only opening the zonulin pathway of paracellular intestinal permeability, you're also opening the paracellular pathway through interferon gamma, fanning out the brush border membrane. I'll show you a picture. So I'll skip that one. That's just about the kinases. But here's the picture. Look in the upper left, number 2, identified there. Lipid raft, endocytosis, meaning bacteria gets carried right through the cell on the back of fat molecules, going right through the cell. For those who endorse high-fat diets and paleo diets, which I think are really good for some people, you have to be aware of this, and you have to be sensitive, looking for biomarkers of LPS and bacteria in the bloodstream from high-fat diets, because this lipid raft transcytosis may be occurring, increasing their blood values of LPS and bacteria. So you have to be sensitive to that if you're encouraging higher fat diets. This is not an anti-high fat diet comment. This is wake up and make sure you're monitoring your people if you're encouraging high fat diets or bulletproof coffee or paleo diets. Just make sure you're looking for LPS infiltration, because it doesn't have to be paracellular with zonulin antibodies. I'll talk more about the testing for this in a minute. We and others demonstrate that bacterial endocytosis by epithelial cells precedes tight junction damage under inflammatory stress. So Kat, if you're listening, Kat is a friend of mine who teaches this information also. Kat, if you're listening to this one, I imagine this is popping your eyes out, that it precedes, transcellular precedes paracellular intestinal permeability. So in terms of these macromolecules that get through into the bloodstream, triggering this whole mechanism of the autoimmune spectrum, the first thing to recognize here is that molecules under 5,000 Daltons, whatever they are, they don't trigger an immune response. That an invading agent into the bloodstream has to be at least 5,000 Daltons in size in order for the immune system to say, whoa, what is this? We better fight this. That's why you don't make antibodies to sugars, is because sugars are smaller than 5,000 Daltons. Gluten proteins are 80,000, 100,000 Daltons. Some of the peptides of poorly digested gluten, 30, 40,000. LPS, 30, 40, 60,000 Daltons. They're monster molecules compared to what should be able and allowed to go through the cheesecloth. They're monster molecules. That's why your immune system reacts to them if they get in. So here's a video that shows when your cheesecloth are working well, the macromolecules can't get through into the bloodstream. Only the smaller molecules that go through the cheesecloth. And notice that these molecules go paracellular in between the cells and transcellular. They do both. That's normal physiology. But when you've got a gut that's been chewed up, when you've got a gut where the villi are reduced also, and the paracellular spaces have been compromised, you've got increase in zonulin proteins. We'll talk about those in a minute. Now you get these macromolecules getting through, and if the macromolecule is chicken, now you make antibodies to chicken. Oh no, wait, not basil. I love basil. Oh my gosh, and oh no, not strawberries. I love strawberries. And all of a sudden you do an IgG test and for 90 foods and it comes back positive to 25 foods. And the patient says, oh my God, that's everything I eat. Well, of course it is. Your immune system's trying to protect you from these macromolecules. You don't suppress the immune system when that happens. You close the tight junctions. You close the intestinal permeability. Wait 6 months and go back and retest. Now they're sensitive to 2 foods, maybe 3. So this mechanism, this whole mechanism that's talked about in my book, The Autoimmune Fix, and we'll be talking on more future webinars about this, is that antigens get in through a permeable intestine. When antigens get in, now the immune response has to come into play here. And whether it's bad bacteria or food molecules or lipopolysaccharides or toxic chemicals, antigens get in through a permeable intestine, activating an immune response. Antibody production to these barrier proteins occurs. Trans and paracellular intestinal permeability to the gut, the brain, the bladder. We'll talk about that more in the future. Activating a pathogenic intestinal permeability mechanism. The antigen and macromolecule gets through. You make antibodies to those macromolecules. Then because of molecular mimicry and other pathways, you make antibodies to your own tissue. Here comes the autoimmune cascade. You know, this causes this, causes this, causes this, causes that. And they come in with that. They come in with joint pain. And you say, well, it looks like rheumatoid arthritis. Let's treat you for rheumatoid arthritis. Well, it's important to treat for the symptoms, of course. That's why patients come. But you've got to go back upstream and fix where the problem is. And once again, the autoimmune process can be arrested if the interplay between genes and environmental triggers is prevented by reestablishing intestinal barrier function. Premise number 4, can foods trigger this? Well, yes, and this is a study. They took 36 patients. 36 patients that had been failures to every treatment protocol they tried at Harvard. Every single protocol. They were failures for at least a year. That was a prerequisite to get into this study, who had irritable bowel syndrome. These patients were non-functional. They were the worst of the worst, and nothing was working. So what did they do? They did confocal endomicroscopy for them, which is a technique where they look at the live, this is live, they look at the cells in the small intestine. And confocal endomicroscopy is there on the left. You're actually seeing the cells and the tight junctions between the cells, and electron microscopy is on the right to compare, so you have a sense of what you're looking at. So they took these 36 people and they exposed them to 4 different common antigens. They exposed them to cow's milk, wheat, yeast, and soy. And they kept the videos going to see what happened to these people. And they kept taking pictures every few seconds of what happens. And they made a video out of a number of pictures. I'm going to show you within 5 minutes of exposure to these antigens, intestinal epithelial lymphocytes increased within 5 minutes. IELs increased. Epithelial gaps formed and intervillous spaces widened within 5 minutes. So here's an example. Box A on the left, confocal image at baseline shows the villi are closely attached. Now, what did they do here? They injected a white dye into a vein in the leg that was going to go back up into the body, right past the intestinal vasculature. So they looked for the white dye in the vasculature of the small intestine. And then they looked to see if any of the dye started to leak, as you can see in picture B, that there were eruptions in the epithelial lining of the gut, and the dye is starting to come out into the lumen of the intestines. And in C, you can see all the dye in the lumen of the intestines. This is like, what? What? And this is Detlef Schupan and his team at Harvard, brilliant gastroenterologist at Harvard and a specialist in celiac disease. So here's the video. Now this is a 5-minute video condensed into 5 minutes of pictures condensed into, I think it's about 40 seconds. So watch what happens here. Just watch as you see the white dye coming out more to the surface here. You say, oh, look, it is out more towards the surface. And now you see there's some gaps starting to form in here. And you see on the right side, now look in the middle, the tight junction, you see how there's white dye out in there. And here comes some more. Now it's really out into the lumen, this white dye that's coming out. So it's reverse permeability, that from the blood vessels inside the villi, it's leaking out now into the lumen. This is within 5 minutes of being exposed to wheat or to soy or to yeast or to dairy. And 36 of the 36 patients, 22 of them had this reaction immediately. 9 to milk, 13 to wheat, 6 to yeast, 4 to soy. Obviously, some responded more to others because wheat and dairy very commonly go together. Within 5 minutes, that occurred. That's intestinal permeability. That's what it looks like, and that's how quickly it can occur in people. Now remember, these were all failures, 1 to 2 years of treatments at Harvard for IBS, severe IBS. So yes, foods can trigger it. Premise number 5, the more antigen exposure, the stronger the inflammatory response. That's just a really important thing to remember, that it's not just one trigger that sets off intestinal permeability. And what we're not going to talk about today, but I want to plant the seed in your mind, is that patients have a microbiota that has developed over time from their lifestyle. Change the lifestyle and you start to change the microbiota, but they still have pathogenic dysbiosis that you have to address directly. And I'll talk about that in the section when we talk about how do you heal this thing of intestinal permeability. You have to work on their microbiota. But in the meantime, the microbiota can be triggering more permeability all by itself. Okay, we've generated evidence that small intestines exposed to bacteria secrete zonulin. This secretion was independent of the virulence of the microorganisms and was followed by an increase in intestinal permeability, the shoelaces being untied. That's what I mean about the microbiota creating dysbiosis. And here's a drawing of what the shoelaces untied looks like. So in between the cells, you see the occludin and the claudin proteins in the artist drawing. And you see in the lower picture, when the shoelaces are untied, the gates open to the Panama Canal. And the pictures on the right, I'm going to show you blow-ups of them and what happens when you have this permeability. Here you go. So the one on the left is the normal. You see the MV in the upper left corner. That's a microvilli. And they're anchoring down into, that's the active myosin network. And then you see on the right, when there's permeability, that the anchoring network is not there any longer. I have a gift for you, for all of you, to say thank you for attending. And that is, I'm giving you all of the studies, all 69 studies that I'm referencing here today. They're all there for you. 46 of the 69 are the full articles. If they were free to me, they're free to you. The other 23 are links to the abstracts. And so you've got them all. You just go to www.thedr.com/vibrant IP for intestinal permeability. Vibrant IP. You don't have to register. You don't have to give me your email address, nothing. Just click on it and the articles are all there for you. thedoctor.com/vibrant IP for intestinal permeability. They're all there. They're all yours. They're all free. And it's my gift for you, to you, so that you can dial this down. You can look at what kind of startled you here today and read more about it. We need you guys out there being experts at this, using these tests, applying the principles to heal the gut so that these patients can get well. So this is what it looks like when you download it. I don't know, it's about 70 pages of articles there for you. My staff put it together for you. So it's all there. Let's move on. How do you test for this? What we're talking about today is testing for intestinal permeability. That's it. That's what this webinar is about. And so let's dial it down. Now, this is the study that introduced me to Vibrant. Blew my mind when I read this study. Look at the authors on this study. You see the last one there, Joseph Murray? There are 4 guys in the United States that I call the 4 horsemen in celiac disease. These guys have been the pioneers for 20, 25 years, carrying the message out that celiac has symptoms outside the gut. They've been really slow on non-celiac gluten sensitivity, but they've been pioneers in the area of their expertise. There is Stefano Guandolini, University of Chicago, Peter Green at Columbia, Alessio Fasano at Harvard, and Joe Murray at Mayo. And Dr. Murray is the one that has leather patches on the elbows of his sport coats and horn-rimmed glasses and bow ties. He's just a classic geek, you know, kind-hearted, pure of heart, really pure of heart, wanting to help the world. Murray and his team published this paper talking about a new era in the identification of biomarkers of disease. And they talked about identifying wheat sensitivity with 99% sensitivity, 97 to 99% sensitivity, 98 to 100% specificity. And this is like, what? What? Ask your lab for the studies on their sensitivity and specificity, and they'll do the two-step. You know what the two-step is? The two-step is dancing around the issue because they don't want to tell you what the sensitivity and specificity is. Ask Vibrant to show you the papers on sensitivity and specificity. This is what you get. You get Joe Murray at Mayo saying 97 to 99% sensitivity, 98 to 100% specificity. Every lab has to up their game to match this. Every lab. Anything less than this is unacceptable. Excuse me, but somebody's got to talk like this. Somebody's got to call people out. And I'm hoping that all of you will go back to your lab reps. You'll get this paper. It's one of the ones I'm giving you. You look at this paper, you show it to your reps and say, show me how you guys compare to this. And it's going to embarrass them. You know, but if they get 100, 200, 300 docs doing this, they're going to up their game. They're going to improve their protocols. They're going to change their diagnostic, the equipment they use. Because this is not the future. This is now, everyone. That's why I'm talking about this today for Vibrant, that this is the cutting edge stuff. So let's talk about markers for antigenic intestinal permeability. Notice the reference that's on top. That's the paper that I just showed you from Joe Murray at Mayo. I've shown you this already. So the first one, let's talk about paracellular. How do you test for paracellular? Well, we know it's the tight junctions. That's the paracellular pathway. Overproduction of zonulin triggered by gliadin and other things causes loosening of the tight junction barrier and an increase in permeability of the gut wall, the leaky gut. Yes, we know that. This results in a process allowing larger molecules that would normally stay in the gut, cross into the bloodstream and trigger IgG food sensitivities. Yes, we've talked about that. Well, here is the area that we're talking about right now, that paracellular space and the proteins that are control the gates of the Panama Canal. Well, the first one is occludin and zonulin, IgG, IgM, IgA. That's what you look at here to see if paracellular intestinal permeability is occurring or not. And that's right here on the test. There you go, IgG and IgA. I'm sorry, it's a typo error on my part there, not including IgM. That was a typo error on my part. My apologies. But that is the identification for paracellular intestinal permeability. The next one, looking at the actomyosin network, because that's what gets damaged with transcellular permeability. And that, of course, is here. We've talked about that. And this is what happens to the actin filaments when exposed to gliadin. So the left is what the epithelial cell looks like normally. The right is what happens when it's exposed to gliadin. It just chews up the skeleton, kind of the architecture of the inside of that cell. And this is between the, this is through the cells now, not between the cells. And here's staining, looking at the actomyosin network. On the left is normal, on the right is exposed to wheat, and it just gets destroyed. And so you've got complete permeability there that looks like this to one degree or another. Well, how do you test for that? You test for that by looking for antibodies to actomyosin. And that's what you get right here, IgG, IgA to actomyosin. Now, remember I talked about the size of molecules that get through before it triggers an immune response. Well, one of them is lipopolysaccharides. And one on the left, the bacterial endotoxins, the lipopolysaccharides. If you've got antibodies in your bloodstream, how in the heck did this stuff get in the bloodstream that your body has to make antibodies to? And it's most often through a permeable intestine. So that's what you're looking at here, is LPS, IgG, and IgM to lipopolysaccharides, because these are macromolecules, 60,000, 100,000, and greater, that are in the bloodstream, and your immune system, trying to protect you, is making antibodies to this stuff. Well, how did it get in there? The primary way is through a permeable intestine. Now, it also can occur because of gingivitis, an open wound, if you've got sepsis, meaning you've got an organ that's just loaded full of bacteria that's been accumulating for years. But the primary way is through intestinal permeability. Okay, let's back up to that. Zonulin is a protein 47,000 Daltons in size. It's way, way too big to get through the gates, the Panama Canal, into the bloodstream. Because of that, zonulin levels will fluctuate in the bloodstream. The half-life of zonulin is about 4 minutes to 4 hours. So one of the arguments that says you don't want to use zonulin levels, which is what Fasano has used for years for his identification, he's measuring the actual amount of zonulin. He's not measuring zonulin antibodies. And most of the studies out there on zonulin and permeability are measuring levels of zonulin, not zonulin antibodies. However, it is true from what I've read that the half-life of zonulin is 4 minutes to 4 hours. It breaks down really quickly. So if you do a single blood draw and you're looking at the amount of zonulin that's in somebody's system, depending on how long what's been secreted into the bloodstream is still there, will determine how accurate it is as to whether this person has permeability or not. So if your zonulin levels come back elevated, you know this is very current. I mean, this person is leaking right now into the bloodstream when that blood was taken. But the absence of it does not mean they don't have permeability, right? Because if you're only using zonulin levels, it may be that when you eat, you get more zonulin release. You eat wheat or something, and you don't have constant intestinal permeability, but you never know that. If you're only measuring zonulin levels. That's why you measure zonulin antibodies, is because the antibodies last for months, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, depending, sometimes 12 weeks that they're there. So you have elevated antibodies, you know that you've got a long-term problem. Zonulin is an acute, immediate problem that's there. So the fluctuation in blood zonulin levels was studied for 6 days in ICU patients with sepsis. They're really sick people. And the values fluctuated by 2 to 10-fold from day to day. Well, they've got sepsis, so you know they're really toxic, but the zonulin levels were fluctuating. So you couldn't really tell just by measuring the amount of zonulin whether they had permeability or not. That's why the antibodies are so valuable to test for. So with all of that in mind, let's just get past this part. In one study, they looked at the elevation levels of zonulin in people in celiacs. 37% of celiacs had elevated levels of zonulin. But the same group, 86% of them had elevated antibodies to zonulin and occludin and other tight junction proteins, which means the antibodies are more comprehensive to identify people with autoimmune diseases. So you always want to check the antibodies. But in my book, I also want to check the zonulin levels. Why? Because that's what the science says is consistent with intestinal permeability. I'm not going to argue with all those papers that are out there. I'm going to try and be as comprehensive as I can. So I'm going to include antibodies, but I'm also going to include zonulin levels because there are many, many papers on that. So in the wheat zoomer, you also look at zonulin levels, not just the antibodies to zonulin. So it's just more comprehensive. It's the most comprehensive test that's out there looking for intestinal permeability. Hold on a second. I got to blow my nose. Sorry, I'm fighting a cold. Actually, I'm not fighting anymore. I've said you win, but it's almost gone. Okay, premise number 6. How do we arrest intestinal permeability? Now, for those of you that are in a tight time frame, this is going to take about 10 more minutes, 10 to 15 more minutes. And I'm going to talk about how you heal pathogenic intestinal permeability. So for those of you that have to go, you just want to know about the testing, that's the testing. There's nothing out there that I know of that's more comprehensive, more reliable than the intestinal permeability component of the Wheat-Zoomer test. It is the go-to test right now, in my opinion, the go-to test. So let's talk about arresting intestinal permeability. You got to put the fire out. So I talk about a concept called pleiotropic, which means all roads lead to Rome. So you want to do everything you can to help heal the intestines. You know, I'll meet guys that say, well, I use glutamine. And they don't say anything else. And I'll say, well, that's great. That's great. But the genes that glutamine turns on do not include the genes that vitamin D turns on, or that curcumin turns on, or that fish oils turn on, or that colostrum turns on. So, you know, the pleiotropic approach means you use a whole lot of different things to get the result you want. And I'm just noticing the time, everyone. And the time is 7 here. So it's 1 hour after we started. So I'm just going to summarize this for you. I'm just going to go to the summary slide, and I will make that information available to you so that if you want the how do I heal intestinal permeability, I just want to be cognizant of your time. So to the bottom and just give you the big picture answers. And then, but I'll make the studies available to you on this. But this is how you heal the gut. You eliminate the inflammatory foods, of course. You include prebiotics. You include fermented foods. You include probiotics, vitamin D, glutamine, fish oil, curcumin, and colostrum. There are many other products you also can use, but these are the go-to ones that have the many studies on them. So I'm going to take about 2 minutes to go through each one of these and just give you the summary. The prebiotics, Mrs. Patient, buy one of every root vegetable in the, of course, always organic, in the vegetable department, a rutabaga, a turnip, a parsnip, radishes, sweet potatoes, carrots, and every day you have at least one root vegetable. Why? Because the fibers of those root vegetables feed different probiotics in your gut, the microbiota in your gut, so you're delivering the food that will feed many different families of probiotics in your gut. And then fermented foods. Mrs. Patient, get 4 different kinds of fermented vegetables, always organic and not pasteurized, because pasteurization kills bacteria, but get sauerkraut, kimchi, fermented beets, miso, and you have one fermented food, a forkful every day. Just walk past the refrigerator, get curry flavor fermented vegetables. I don't care which ones you get, but you get a different one every day. And you're inoculating with thousands and thousands of bacteria on every forkful. You're inoculating with the probiotics. You also can use probiotics, of course they work, but it's the diversity of the microbiome that determines its strength and its resistance, its resilience to everything that we expose it to. So the diversity is encouraged by varying your prebiotics and your probiotic foods that you're eating. Vitamin D. Vitamin D controls the gates of the Panama Canal, bottom line. It controls the proteins of the tight junction strands and the kissing joints. And so you always want vitamin D. And I give at least 5,000 units a day to anyone that's 13 or over. And I do it in capsule form, not in a liquid and not as a sublingual. Why? Because I want this vitamin D in the lumen of the gut to heal the gut. Taking sublingual is great, and liposomal is great for systemic work, but you want this in the gut. Other vitamin D sources could go throughout the entire body, but I want this vitamin D in the gut. Glutamine, of course, we all know about glutamine. Fish oils, anti-inflammatory, turn genes on that glutamine and vitamin D don't to heal the gut. Curcumin, nothing is more potent as an anti-inflammatory than curcumin. And when you read the studies, and you'll see the studies in the handouts I'm giving you, you will see that curcumin helps to heal the gut, repopulate the microbiota, and reduce inflammation. And of course, colostrum. As my friend Dr. Andrew Keach says, there are many one-note players to heal the gut, but only curcumin plays the entire symphony. I'm sorry, only colostrum plays the entire symphony. And so you always want to include colostrum. What if they have a dairy sensitivity? This is patient. We just found out you're sensitive to dairy. All right, get it out of there. Get the cheese out, get the milk out, get the ice cream out, all of that stuff. However, I'm going to suggest that you use this colostrum for 2 months. Why? Because it's going to turn on more genes than anything else. When a baby is born, it's colostrum that heals their permeability. There's nothing that works like colostrum. And as long as you don't have any symptoms from taking the colostrum, you don't get any bloating, you don't get any gut pain, you don't get any diarrhea from it, then do it for a couple of months and then get it out of there. But in the meantime, get all the rest of the dairy out. That's how I deal with the dairy sensitivity question with colostrum. And the only colostrum I'll use is the one that you'll see it on my website. It comes from Dr. Keach. His colostrum is licensed by at least 3, there may be more now, countries in Europe that in Africa. Countries in Africa. The governments of 3 countries in Africa pay for his colostrum as the treatment of choice for people diagnosed with HIV. That's how potent that colostrum is. It's just remarkable. All grass-fed cows, no antibiotics, no growth hormones. You'll see it on my website. But any colostrum is better than none. So with that, I'm going to wrap this one up. I've gone over by about 5 minutes. I apologize to everyone. But once again, you can get all the studies at thedoctor.com/vibrant IP for intestinal permeability. Vibrant IP. So thank you all very much. If you don't know, I've got a program that I teach online about all of this and how to become a gluten practitioner, a certified gluten practitioner. For those of you that don't know about Betrayal, we interviewed 84 of the world leaders on autoimmunity. It's all free. It's at thedoctor.com/betrayal. We've had 500,000 people see this, and I'd recommend it to all of your patients. They'll come back and ask you so many questions about how can they do this and how can they do that, and they see you then as the expert because you're wanting to deal with this for them. And with that, I'm just going to say thank you all so very much for the opportunity to speak to you.
Wow, thanks so much, Dr. O'Brien. That was just an excellent summary of the research out there on pathogenic intestinal permeability. And, on behalf of Vibrant, I definitely want to thank you for your time and your generosity in jumping in on this with us. I think we can easily say you're someone who has really experienced the power of Vibrant's Wheat Zoomer in your life, but also your patients' lives. We're going to quickly jump to a Q&A session. We have a few minutes. If you have a few minutes, Dr. O'Brien, to stick around. If anybody listening has burning questions for Dr. O'Brien. Before we start the Q&A session, though, I do want to make you aware of a special offer for our listeners. If you are attending this webinar, you are eligible to receive a 20% discount on a Wheat Zoomer for yourself if it's ordered within the next 30 days. You would contact our physician services department, and that email is going to be support@vibrant-america.com. And you can also call them at our physician services number, which I think if you already have an account, you probably already have that. It's also on our website, 1-866-364-0963. The discount applies only to registered attendees present on the webinar. It's not transferable to friends, family members, or others. But if you have not yet had a Wheat Zoomer run on yourself, or you've had one, but it's been a while and you want to run a follow-up, that is an offer out there for those of you listening in. So we will open up for questions. If you are on the web or if you're using the mobile app for the webinar, you can type those into the little Q&A box, and they'll pop up, and we'll, Dr. O'Brien, can you see the Q&A box on your end?
One moment. I still see my slides on the screen.
So if you hover
Awesome.
over the bottom of your screen.
Stop share. So I just clicked stop share, and I see on the bottom Q&A, and I'm clicking on that. Yes, okay, I'm with you.
Okay. And so
I see the first question.
Okay.
Is organic wheat have same gluten effect on the gut as the normal wheat? Really good question. Really good question. The answer is unfortunately yes. That once you have elevated antibodies to any of the peptides of wheat, not just gliadin, but any of the peptides of wheat, you produce memory B cells. Memory B cells never forget. A memory B cell's job is to make sure for the rest of its life, the memory B cells to make sure anytime that antigen is presented, that it activates an immune response. So that unfortunately is the case with wheat. We don't know about that with all other food sensitivities, but there are a number of papers on wheat with memory B cells. The next question, what is the test and can we get it in Canada? Sarah, I'll let you answer that.
So the test is called the Wheat Zoomer, and at this time we are not set up to run it in Canada because of the shipping blood samples across the border. However, I do know that is something that we're working on, because we do have some providers in Canada that have asked about creating accounts. It's in the works. I don't really have a time frame on when that's going to be available, though. It has to do with customs, and because we're sending biological samples across international borders, technically.
Okay, Cindy asked questions. Cindy, I'm sorry, it's not in the realm of this particular event. The answer is it depends. There's much more to that question than I can answer here. This one's on permeability. Teresa says, do you ever reintroduce gluten in people with NCGS whose permeability resolved? No, because of memory B cells. They don't forget. Kelly Garner says, what about fermented organic sprouted spelt? As much as we'd love to have our bread in one way or another, you can't argue with memory B cells. If you get an infant and you expose them to organic, pure wheat in minute amounts, they may be able to build up resilience if they don't have all of the other toxins that accumulate and make their immune system hypervigilant. That's a whole webinar in itself, folks, and that's in my book. But it's the reason why you cannot reintroduce wheat in any form once they've had elevated antibodies. If you have that amino acid sequence that in the food you're delivering, that the immune system has created memory B cells to, anytime you put that amino acid sequence back in there, you're going to activate an immune response. That's the whole premise behind vaccinations and immunizations. And if you want to think about it for a minute, what do you do if you've been to Africa and you had vaccinations for yellow fever and dengue fever and all that? You go back 20 years later, you get a booster shot 2 weeks before you go. Why? To wake up the memory B cells to yellow fever and dengue fever. It's the same thing with wheat. Are you aware of any connection of gut permeability to myalgic encephalopathy? Oh, absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. No question whatsoever. The most common symptom in clinical practice that I've seen from permeability is affecting brain function. Absolutely. And we didn't get into that today. It'll be a future webinar on the NeuroZoomer. I can tell you now that the markers for intestinal permeability are very similar to the markers for blood-brain barrier permeability. You have a leaky gut, you likely have a leaky brain. You have a leaky brain, you get macromolecules going into the brain. You get macromolecules going to the brain, you activate the immune system of the brain, the glial cells, to protect you. You activate the glial cells and you've got bazookas going off in your brain trying to protect you. So yes, absolutely on that. Nanette, thank you, Nanette. Okay, Sarah, she's asking for phone numbers and something. Okay, I guess we'll miss on that. One of the recommendations on the wheat zoomer is adding L-arginine. Why is that important to add? I'll let Sarah answer that one for you, Beth. Sarah, are you there?
Sorry, I muted myself and I couldn't unmute fast enough. Nanette, we will send an email to follow up for attendees with the contact information, but really quick, the phone number again was 1-866, actually let me pull it off because I don't have it memorized, 866-364-0963, or you can email support@vibrant-america.com. And then, I'm sorry, you asked about the wheat zoomer in the comment about arginine.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes,
yeah. So, yeah, and this is actually kind of interesting. Arginine actually enhances the absorption and facilitation of glutamine in the epithelial cells of the intestinal lining. And so when they're taken combined together, the actions of glutamine are actually increased within the cell, provided that it's appropriate to give that person arginine. You wouldn't want to do that in a few specific clinical situations, such as somebody who has a viral flare or is at risk for not chickenpox, but
herpes.
Yeah, like if you, as an adult, you get shingles, you wouldn't want to give somebody arginine. That's just one example of that. But outside of that, typically it's a fairly safe supplement, and you can find some products out on the market that have both of them in it.
I think that's it on the question, Sarah.
All right.
Oh, Cindy asked, would pregnancy change the test results? That's a really good question. And the immune system does calm down. The autoimmune mechanisms calm down during pregnancy. It's nature's way of making sure that mom doesn't get rid of this foreign thing in her body. So that is a really good question, Cindy. And I don't know the percentages of diminishment of autoimmune mechanisms for food sensitivities and permeability. I can't answer that. I honestly don't know, but it's a rational, very good thought.
So I can say we have had a handful of wheat zoomers that I've either spoken with the provider that's run it, or one of the other clinical team members has. Kat and Suzanne, I think, have some experience with this too. And typically their immune system is not so suppressed that they wouldn't come back with enough of an immune response for us to be able to read it on the wheat zoomer, unless they already have an immunoglobulin deficiency. But usually in the few cases of pregnancy that we've seen this, it's come back with enough of something for us to be able to make a call on that. That's just more observational though, because I don't, off the top of my head, also don't know what the numbers are in terms of what percentage of diminishment of immune response you would see.
Yes, but we can say that if it comes back positive, she's got a problem.
Absolutely. Yep. Positive antibodies are definitely positive. All right. Well, I think that was it. And Dr. Tom, once again, thank you so much for your time today. We have been just so excited to have you on. And again, I want to throw out the phone number, the email one more time for those who had questions about getting the discounted wheat zoomer ordered. The phone number for support is 1-866-364-0963, and their email address is support@vibrant-america.com. Any questions about ordering that or setting up an account, that would be who you would go through initially to contact, as well as for the discount on the testing. And, again, Dr. Tom, on behalf of Vibrant, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Sarah. My pleasure.
You're welcome. Have a great day, everyone.